In 1970, John Lennon, along with Yoko Ono, released his first solo album titled John Lennon Plastic Ono Band that featured a track called Mother. In it, Lennon screams the words, "Mama, don't go, Daddy, come home," until the song eventually fades. It's well known that John Lennon at the time was engaged in a new and very popular form of psychotherapy called primal therapy, pioneered by Arthur Janov, who encouraged his clients to relive the most painful moments of their childhood, and if necessary, give voice to the repressed emotions in a guttural scream. Therapy, like any social construct, changes with the fashion of time. What we consider to be good therapy can be attributed to many factors: evidence-based research, popular culture, what our insurance companies tell us is covered, and sometimes what we consider to be good comes from a deeply meaningful experience, one that's made an impact on our psyche and it's changed how we operate in the world. I'm Talia Singer, and this is WhateverWorks. In this podcast, I'm meeting with people who've had similar experiences with different types of therapy. In today's episode, I talk with Sam and her experience with sand tray therapy. Hey Sam, so great you can join me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm curious, how did you find sand tray therapy in the first place?
I think that I was just not getting what I needed from, the standard social work psychotherapist at that time. I'm really creative. I do lots of arts and crafts, and I'm a very visual person. And I think I honestly Googled like creative social worker, and this therapist came up who was close to me, who just from appearance just looked comforting. So that's how I went from psychotherapy for a couple of years to sand tray.
If you haven't heard of sand tray therapy, it's also known as Jungian sand play therapy and is a faction of play therapy developed by Jungian psychoanalyst Dora Kalf in the 1950s. What is the part of sand tray do you think that hooked you in?
It goes back to the reason why I sought therapy out in the first place, which was I had family dynamic issues with my mom growing up where I was really silenced.
At the time, she was roughly 24 years old and her parents had just split up. She had discovered that her mother had had an affair and that she was the one who was charged with telling her father.
And there was trauma, emotional abuse, verbal abuse in childhood. And it had just at that point, I had to get that out because for so long I was silenced by her.
Can you describe maybe what a sand tray session is like?
Mm-hmm. So I remember I went into her office, and this is a side note. I love going to garage sales. So I love picking up and looking at little trinkets and little figurines. Like I love that. So when I walked into her office, it was like, I'm here, like I'm in the space where I'm supposed to be, because she had just walls of figurines, bins of figurines. If you needed like fishing for whatever reason, fishing equipment was in one. And these are like little tiny figurines, but fishing, construction site, wisdom words. And then there was this beautiful sand tray in the middle that she would open up, and it had white sand in it, which became symbolic. And it had blue bottoms and blue sides, which could represent water or the sky. And then you were just free. It was like a big, you didn't want to sit. You had to continually keep moving and observing because you're really working with that sand and the figurines to create that emotion that you couldn't get out with words. You were getting out with ease.
So in essence, with sand tray, you're kind of constructing a tableau of your thoughts. Would that describe it correctly?
I think that's perfect. She really described it as just this nonverbal therapeutic intervention, which she felt would be a really good fit for me. She noted that she wouldn't talk to me unless I needed that support. The times when I needed her support, it was me crying, and she'd come over and sit right beside me. And again, she wouldn't say anything until the very end, where she's like, okay, I would like you to explain what this is, that tableau. What does it all mean? And that's when she would start taking notes. And it was very minimal, but for her notes only. So it wasn't, again, someone sitting across from me taking notes. She would really just be as observant that I needed. And then she would kind of give her interpretation. Wow, like it looks like this figurine's on a hill, and hills can represent power. And do you think that figurine represents that person had power over you? And it was all these little things that you don't think of. It just organically comes out, and then you sit back and you're like, wow, like that's exactly what that's supposed to mean.
What does a therapist do?
I really just saw my therapist as this wise role, this independent outside of my life who had a supportive role. I didn't want her to become part of my family in that way, but she was this supportive person that I really hadn't experienced in my life with my mother. I never had that support from my mom.
No, I think it's important for you to, really describe what the relationship is like. Would it make sense to describe it as a really powerful witness?
Absolutely.
And what are some misconceptions people may have about Santre therapy?
I think when I have mentioned it, sounds weird. Like, why would I want to go and play in sand? Like that idea of I'm paying somebody to help me and listen to me, and not understanding the power in silence or the power in play.
There might be some sort of thought of like regression or a misconception, like you said, around particularly the therapist not talking and in the witnessing. You mean like she's not going to work on a goal with you or a strategy or, and she just sits there and you're like, yes, and it's wonderful.
I mean, we definitely had a few sessions about what I wanted to definitely accomplish, and the complications that and the trauma of my childhood, and asking the same reason as to why are you choosing me? And I said to her pretty much what I had said. I just need something different. I'm creative, and I think I'll connect with this well. And so I came to this therapy session in particular, and I remember her asking me, describe your family. And I took the whole hour and I cried because I had to go through these bins of trying to find out what these characters of my family, how was I going to describe them? And it really was a hard thing to do because for so long as a child, I had to look up at my mom. She was my mother, and she was supposed to represent love and everything like that. Because I had gone from the bucket of feminine figurines to the monster bin. And I felt going from that bin that I should have been taking it from and going to this monster bin, I can't tell you the tears that came from that. Because I was finally maybe able to have my voice heard in this way. And the one tableau that I remember probably the most, that was the most impactful, was I put a figurine. It was my mom, and she was gray and scary, and she had claws, and her mouth was open. It was like one of those G.I. Joe size monsters. So it was really, really big. And I needed that to show the power that she had over me and my family for such a long time. And then I remember looking at my therapist and saying, I don't want it to be this way. And then she goes, then you need to fix it. So I took this monster figure, my mom figure, and I buried her. I buried her in the sand. And it was really impactful to see that I had a choice, that I can do that I could no longer hear her abuse, her put downs. And I think the other key part here as well was at the beginning of my sessions, I had to pick what I look like. And I had actually just remembered this today before this happened. And I picked a Fisher-Price little doll, and her hands were behind her back. And her eyes were looking up, and she was very small. And all the sessions that I had, I swear it was me looking at my mom, me looking up at all these big things as a little girl until that session. And in that session, when I was done and I was putting these things away, I said to my therapist, I said, were her eyes always looking straight? She goes, they were always looking straight. And I said, so for this whole time, I have thought that this little doll, this little figurine, her eyes were looking up. She goes, they were never looking up. But your perception was you were never equal to. So that's the impact. That was probably, when I think of this particular session, I get tearful because it just was so important in my healing that I often reflect on it. I really do.
In that session, it sounds like you grew existentially. You suddenly became taller.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did. Yeah, I found my voice through figurines and from the boundaries, like I never used that word at that time, but looking back now, it's like I broke down that boundary with my mom and I had power again over me, that I didn't have to look up to her anymore, that I could be bigger than. And I was.
And particularly with sand tray, the fact that it has these corners, so like the boundaries of the tray feels very safe and contained. You can make her a monster within those walls.
And even more so, putting the figurines back as you're cleaning up.
Tell me about that.
I mean, taking those figurines and those, wisdom stones or all the other things I had taken before and actually putting them back and saying, I don't need you right now. I'm not going to play with you anymore. I'm going to put you away and I'm going to put you in that bin. I'm not going to see you maybe for a month, maybe 2 weeks, but I'm going to put that power in that I don't need. I'm going to keep it there.
That symbolizes also the relationship with the therapist, meaning like she says without words, I will keep the monster here. You no longer have to carry her on your back.
I definitely agree with that. Definitely agree with that. So, I mean, we did, and she had said to me, she keeps all the figurines here and I get to walk out and just feel proud that I was able to get through what I got through.
If you don't mind, I'm curious how this changed your relationship with your mother or within your family afterwards.
Oh, that's a great question. I think it empowered me. It empowered me a lot that when I did have that interaction, when she tried to silence me, I knew that I didn't have to be, or that I didn't have to talk to her back, because I had this inner wisdom that came with it to say, I can express my words in different ways.
Through the medium of sand, Sam was finally able to stand up to her mother, even if the only witness was effectively a stranger, her therapist, someone she had gotten to know very quickly and intimately. Do you think creating that tableau where you got to say she's a monster, and you got to say it in the presence of a trusted adult?
Oh, with my whole heart. I think that was necessary. I don't think I would have healed if I didn't experience that, which goes back to why maybe I didn't get the, regular psychotherapist. I needed her to sit with me and made me feel really safe. And that's what her office represented. That's what her reassurance was. And just having safety and creating these, grabbing that monster and not feeling guilt or shame or having to explain it. It was what I felt at the time. And that's what she provided the space for.
Why do you think this particular style of therapy worked for you over more, I think, widely known types of therapies?
I think it was because I wanted something different. I've been doing psychotherapy since I was an undergrad, and it wasn't getting me to where I wanted. And where I was at that time when I came in to see my therapist, I really needed different support that I wasn't getting. And I really liked the idea that she was just going to be present. Mm-hmm. Where, there's no major questions being asked. It was my turn to be watched in a supportive way. And there was this power of, for an hour, looking at these different figurines and my therapist sitting there just simply watching me. That's all she did until about 10 minutes before we ended. And the power in my voice being expressed in that way of just someone being in the room with me, powerful, healing, was exactly what I needed. Because I wasn't silenced. I was actually given a huge voice. It was just in wonderful figurines.
The sand in sand tray therapy represents the vastness of the unconscious. It's shapeless and formless until a memory emerges up into consciousness. In Sam's case, it was the memory of her mother standing over her in a position of power, evoking fear in her younger self. Once Sam was able to give form to the so-called monster, she was able to also bury her memory of being powerless before her. I'm Talia Singer, and this is the first episode of WhateverWorks. This episode was produced by me and edited by David Conroy and Jason Ball. Join me next time. The theme song for this podcast is called Universal Donor, off the album Hopeful Monster, written and performed by Jason Ball. You can find it on Spotify and Apple Music.